especially from the internal something like something available. But I don't think they don't graduate from that.
Heidi, I can keep letting people in, but if you want to get started, you're welcome to.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, The Roots of the Pinelands, the remarkable trees at the center of it all. Thank you for joining us on this Monday, a little belated Arbor Day celebration with us. My name is Heidi Yeh. I'm the policy director, been here since 2022 at Pinelands Alliance. So we have many different initiatives under our umbrella at Pinelands Alliance. We are a nonprofit 501c3. But today's goal today, talking about trees, goal number one is just to appreciate the gorgeous photos of the pinelands that we have, courtesy of the many photographers who participate in our annual photography competition. And throughout today's presentation, I'm going to touch on 3 different themes. First, we're going to talk about the 2 iconic trees of the pinelands. We're going to weave in some Pine Barrens ecology throughout. And we're going to talk about how you can speak for the trees and join in our mission at Pinelands Alliance. So, welcome to the Pinelands. It is the largest surviving forest on the eastern seaboard of the US. It is named for its pitch pine forests, but as promised, we'll be talking about 2 different trees that really characterize this landscape, both the pitch pine and the Atlantic white cedar. So, focusing first on our Atlantic white cedar, these are trees that like to have their feet wet, with their roots starting right at the top of where the water meets the land. And luckily for them, 1/3 of the pinelands is wetlands. So there are very abundant locations where Atlantic white cedar can thrive in the pinelands. These trees grow tall and straight, and they are resistant to bugs and rot. So as you can see in this picture, although some of these trees have, they're dead, they'll still be standing and look quite intact for quite a while after they've actually become deceased. So for both of these characteristics, Atlantic white cedar was prized as shipbuilding material, and a lot of it was harvested within the last couple centuries as a result. But in those pockets that still remain, they create this dense canopy because they grow so close together, and they feel like cool pockets within the pinelands. These ecosystems, they promote groundwater recharge, and that is feeding that Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer and really cleaning it up and sending pure water out into our surrounding estuaries. Atlantic white cedars provide a refuge for mosses and all the wildlife that thrives on them. We have this eastern box turtle that's enjoying the moss. And these are really important for climate because Atlantic white cedar, they are peat forming wetlands, which makes them an important carbon sink, because as in many ecosystems, most of the carbon is actually stored in the soil. So although we see the really majestic trees above the ground that have carbon all within their tissues, most of the carbon to protect within this ecosystem is actually under the surface. And we can see in this figure here, where I circled the color for the soils, in every ecosystem that we look at here, with the exception of a tropical rainforest, most of the carbon is actually locked up in the soil of that ecosystem. And this is especially true in Atlantic white cedar swamps, where 70 to 90% of the total ecosystem carbon is actually in the peat and the muck that is formed at the roots. Now, Atlantic white cedar is not fire tolerant. So although they're locking up a lot of carbon there, all of that is at risk if those stands become, if they fall prey to fire. And they are sensitive to water levels and salt intrusion. So because they like to have their feet wet, that means that they're right at the periphery of where the water meets the land. And as sea level is rising and bringing more salt water into the pinelands, that's kind of making these Atlantic white cedars like the canaries in the coal mine that are perishing first. which means that they are very vulnerable to climate change because of both that saltwater intrusion and because of that risk of fire. And as a result, that has formed ghost forests along the New Jersey coastline. And it's estimated that we've lost 2,100 to 3,000 acres of dead forest so far because of the combination of these forces. Now, DEP is working to restore cedar habitat, and we know about some work that's about to happen in the Warren State Forest. So we can keep everyone, we'll keep the public engaged on what's happening on that front so that they can know what has been proposed. But even when we do make these monumental efforts to restore white cedars, Atlantic white cedar, this population is still very vulnerable to deer and beavers. So when these trees regenerate, they'll often be on these little hummocks. They look very tasty to deer and they will just annihilate them. So often an approach is just to plant way more than they actually need and hope that a few will survive the deer. And then beaver are also a concern because since the Atlantic white cedar like to have their feet wet and they're right at that edge of the water, when the beavers cause flooding to happen, the Atlantic white cedars are right where that flooding is going to occur, which has contributed to those ghost forests that we mentioned. So that was the Atlantic white cedar, and now we'll turn to the pitch pines. Pitch pines have a thick resinous bark that was used for multiple elements of shipbuilding. So the pitch was useful to seal up the hulls of ships, tar was used to preserve the rigging, and sap was distilled into turpentine, which can be used for paints and varnishes. And here's a great photo here from the Long Island Pine Barren Society, where they also have pine barren habitat, where you can see the thick resinous bark that's basically like shingles on the tree that's protecting that inner core and it contributes to its fire adaptations. Another fire adaptation that the pitch pine has is its serotinous pine cones. So on the left, you can see how they start off closed and the seeds are locked up inside of that pine cone. But on the right, you can see after a fire has come through that those pine cones open up and release the seeds. And that's because they're waiting for the fire to clear out everything before their seeds make it to the ground. Another fire adaptation of pitch pines is that they have epicormic sprouting, which is quite unique among trees, where they will sprout directly from their trunks new growth after fire has eliminated all of the existing growth. As a result of all these fire adaptations, the pitch pines are actually fire dependent. Because fire cleans up leaf litter from the forest floor. So when you have all these needles and moss and everything in the way, it can become, it's very hard for the pitch pine seeds to find their way to the forest floor, which is why they really need that cleared out first before they can regenerate. And we can see that pitch pines quickly regenerate after a fire. These pictures were taken, I think, within months of a major fire coming through these areas. And fire can also help to keep pest populations down, such as the southern pine beetle, which we can see the scarring from on this photo to the left, where the beetles have been active and caused death within this area. And fire is very important because it maintains that pine-dominated forest. And that's why hardwoods are not allowed to take over like oaks. There are oaks in the mix of the pinelands, but because their populations are kind of kept at bay by the recurring fires, that's why we call it the pinelands and not the oaklands. And because of this unique ecological niche that's been created for the pitch pines, there is this globally rare pygmy pine plain forest, whole 15,000 acres, which is globally rare and a really unique thing to see in the pinelands, where you can basically be standing in the middle of the forest, but see over most of the trees. And there have been major fires over the years, such as the Jones Road fire, most recently, that burned 15,000 acres. And the Warren Grove fire within the last couple decades, that was 13,500 acres. But the largest forest fire that has happened in the Pinelands was in 1963, that burned 183,000 acres. Now, when, as we see in this picture here, when shrubs grow too dense, these can act as ladder fuels, and that brings the low intensity fires that may burn on the ground up to the treetops, where it creates a high intensity fire that's much more destructive to the health of these trees. In a natural fire regime, these forests are used to recovering from fire about every 15 to 25 years. But climate change is shortening the interval between these burns. So forests are having to regenerate more frequently from these fires. The fire season has also become a lot longer. For example, March 15th is still officially the start of fire season, but that's basically obsolete now because fires will start regularly as early as March, maybe even February. And since humans have their homes and development all throughout the Pinelands, we can't let the fires burn just as they will, like when there was no development beforehand. So we are trying to mimic the function, the ecological functions with prescribed burns that happen on an annual basis. However, due to dry conditions, climate change is interfering with this as it changes how much moisture is present and when it would be safe or not safe to do a prescribed burn. So as a result of that drought that we had last year, only 22% of the prescribed burns that had been planned for the winter of 24 to 25 were actually able to be performed. And when you get a backlog of these prescribed burns, that just increases the risk to the whole system. That was the pitch pine. So we talked about these two iconic trees, but together they create this one pine barrens ecosystem that supports iconic pine barren species, such as the pine barrens tree frog, barred owls, screech owls. I love this one. It looks like he just got out of bed. The pine warbler, and many other birds and other animals, such as the gray tree frog, the rough green snake, and sometimes even a pine snake. So how do we balance all of these trees, all of this wildlife? How do we balance it all with human development? The New Jersey Pinelands National Reserve has been a hallmark and really great model for how we can try to find a balance between ecosystem needs and human development. So in 1979, the Pinelands Protection Act created the National Reserve, which is 1.1 million acres. And within that, there's a smaller section that is under the jurisdiction of the Pinelands Commission. We call that the state designated area, which is 938,000 acres. And as kind of a roadmap for Pinelands protection that is administered by the Pinelands Commission, they created the Pinelands Comprehensive Management Plan, which we refer to as the CMP. So the CMP, it limits the location and intensity of development. It tries to kind of push development to the periphery and certain regional growth areas while preserving the core of the most ecologically valuable lands. And this is all represented in the map that you see here on the left, the New Jersey Pinelands Land Capability Map. You can think of this color coding as each different color indicates a different intensity of development or level of protection. So for example, the orange areas, you can build more there, whereas the more green areas, those are more protected. As a result of the limits that the CMP has put on development, as well as various preservation programs, over half of the Pinelands has now been permanently preserved. But we do still need Pinelands advocates because the battle is not over. So 70 to 90% of the Pinelands is currently forested, but we can't take those forests for granted. Just because a forest is standing today doesn't mean that it won't become a data center or a warehouse within a year. And for example, we are trying to raise awareness about the bulldoze first, ask permission later approach, which has happened recently in Franklin Township. In this past year or so, about 45 acres of forested wetlands were cleared on a Franklin Township property without Pinelands Commission approval. So our understanding is that it is being done for the purpose of this one exception that the CMP makes for clearing forests for agriculture. In this case, it can only be for cranberries and blueberries. However, you still need to apply to the Pinelands Commission in order to do this, because any area greater than 1,500 square feet of land, if you intend to clear that for this horticulture, you need to apply to the Pinelands Commission. And that's because the Pinelands Commission does important reviews to take stock of where are threatened and endangered species on a property, and they will make suggestions, well, requirements really, for how the actual development should proceed, usually implementing timelines such as schedules that will steer clear of when animals are hibernating or not hibernating, so that they can not be present when the destruction is happening. So were threatened and endangered populations lost here in this Franklin Township case? But because the clearing has already happened, now we'll never know. So although that is a depressing story, we do have some recent success stories to announce. In Evesham Township, at the headwaters of the Black Run Preserve, just earlier this year, a contract was signed with Green Acres to preserve 835 acres that was otherwise going to become 270 homes. Another recent success in the Pomona Woods, another 265 acres were preserved. This is in Hamilton Township, down in the Cape May area. And this was going to be redeveloped into a youth sports complex, but it is now just preserved as forest. And then another recent example in Pemberton Township, the Polebridge Forest, we stopped the plan to redevelop this forest into an age-restricted community. So for the moment, 718 acres have been saved from that development, but this battle is still not over. We're still pushing for a final preservation deal and hoping that any other development ambitions will not come to fruition. And we're hoping that this land can then be joined into the Brendan T. Byrne State Forest because it's contiguous with that. Now, in our recent State of the Pinelands report, which you can find online or get a physical copy at our headquarters, we gave a thumbs up to the state legislature for a bill that was proposed to remove farmland from redevelopment eligibility. But we are also continuing to work with legislators and asking them to include forests as part of that. We don't think it's appropriate for forests to be redeveloped because they were never developed in the first place. So if you want to get engaged and help speak for the trees, contribute to our mission, I encourage you all to sign up for action alerts. Now, there's a good chance that all of you are already getting this. If you got an email on Saturday from me, then that means you're already signed up. But for anyone else that's watching this, just go to our website, go down to the bottom and click that orange button to sign up for email updates and make sure that you are signed up for action alerts. And we'll tell you about things such as tree planting volunteer events. And we do have one that's coming up at Pemberton Lake on May 9th. So if you want to sign up for that and get more information, contact Stephen at pinelandsalliance.org. And you can also get other action alerts through that monthly email that I send out. We'll let you know about any protests or petitions, other ways to speak for the trees. And I encourage everyone to check out our YouTube channel. The recording from today's webinar will show up there, and you can see previous webinars that we did over the past many years. And we encourage everyone to come see the trees for yourselves. Of course, these photos were beautiful, but it doesn't compare to actually being in the midst of these trees. For anyone with accessibility challenges, we have great resources through Access Nature, now called Nature Accessible for All, where you can use this nifty map and see which ones are appropriate for wheelchairs or other forms of movement throughout these wild spaces. And we're always adding more, and you can contribute your data to this as well. And we have Pinelands Adventures, which also includes accessible tours where you can go kayaking, canoeing, or go on various hiking or bus tours of the Pinelands. So thank you all for your attention today and for your love of the trees, coming here to appreciate them with us. And if you have any more questions, we'll take some after this webinar right now, but you can also email me at heidi@pinelandsalliance.org.
Thank you, Heidi. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask. I can give you those permissions or raise your hand and we can call on you. Looks like Lynn has a question. So Lynn, I'm going to allow your mic and you can ask away. You would just have to unmute yourself, Lynn. And if that's an issue, you can also just type it in the chat.
Looks like she's unmuted.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, is there a list of where are good places to see Atlantic white cedar? Paul is asking in the chat. Good question. The place where I've been most recently was in Brandon T. Burns State Forest, though of course that's a whole forest, so that would be nice to have these little pin marks. That is a good question, so we'll have to get back to you with more information on that.
Yeah, I think we could ask Jason, and then in a follow-up email when we do post this, we could send some recommendations there in a follow-up email. And then Lynn, I think you're unmuted. Can you hear us or can you try talking?
Okay, and then Katie Rowden is asking in the Q&A, do you have any good resources to recommend on the history and culture of the Pine Barrens? Rachel, you probably are better to answer that.
The question was, sorry, I'm trying to manage the mics. The question was, any good resources?
Are there any good resources? Yeah.
To recommend on the history and culture of the Pine Barrens?
Yeah.
Yes, so we have on our website, if you go to learn, the tab learn, we have tons of history there. So we have history about the Pinelands and its people, Pine Barrens overview, the ecosystem, plants, wildlife, all of that. I will actually link that right now, right in here, and then you can kind of explore there. There you go.
Meryl is asking, after the loss of so many trees this winter, is there a good resource to buy white cedars to plants?
That would also be a question we could talk to Stephen about with any of the nurseries that he works with and suggest some of them that don't, because a lot of the nurseries that we work with are wholesale, but I'm sure that there's some that are not wholesale. So this sounds like we have a big list of follow-up email things to note.
Yes. Okay, Elisa's asking, how do you address our township if you're concerned about an upcoming project that will require chopping a whole pine forest down in my town? So first you'd need some information on whether is it in the Pinelands or not. Because just knowing if it's going to have to go through a layer of review at the Pinelands Commission is an important step. If it's outside of the Pinelands, then you'll have to be asking your town council directly and expressing your concern. I think really the most effective thing is just bringing a lot of people out to complain, to voice their concerns at those township meetings, because we've seen many examples where the leadership does change their votes. They change their view on something because there's just been so much public pressure.
Oh, and I also just wanted to note for whoever asked about a good spot to see the Atlantic white cedar, there is I think it's called the 1801 trail or 1809 trail, which I will also link in here. That is a very beautiful trail, and I'm pretty sure it's the Outdoor Club of South Jersey who helped to make that trail. And that is like honestly so magical walking down there with all the cedars. So let me also put that in the chat.
Mhm. And then back on the, when you're concerned about how much tree removal is going to take place because of a development project, you can send us a tip. Can either email me directly, or it works really well if you use this form here, where you give us the basic details of something, and then we'll do our research into it, get in contact with you. And if you want to stay anonymous, we can do that. At least like we will keep the information internal to our team, but not release that to any officials that we're talking with or the press. So probably on a monthly basis, we receive like 5 to 10 different tips about things that people are concerned about. And those really start off most of the projects that most of the cases that we are investigating come from tips from concerned residents.
Anyone have
Okay,
any
Lynn
other
still has her hand
questions?
up. Lynn, would you be able to type yours in the chat? Okay, if not, I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heidi. And yeah, we'll send up a follow-up email. We'll get this on YouTube. And if you have questions, you can just email Heidi and we can get back to you. So thank you, Heidi. That was awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good
Thank you,
day,
everyone. Have a good
everyone.
day.